This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Behind those cozy nights at home, thousands of employees at BP go to work every day. People producing more U.S. natural gas. People building grid-scale solar capacity. People turning landfill waste gas into pipeline-quality renewable natural gas. And people delivering all of that power where it's needed. They're part of the more than 300,000 jobs BP supports across the country. Learn more at bp.com/investing in America.
Bored with your boring cardio? Stop pedaling that snooze cycle to Nowheresville and try some cardio that's actually fun. Supernatural Fitness, available on MetaQuest. Isn't that right, Jane Fonda?
Cardio will never be boring again.
Sweat to the beat of thousands of chart-topping songs inside stunning virtual landscapes.
Bet your stationary bike can't do that.
Visit GetSupernatural.com and join the next fitness revolution. Supernatural VR Fitness, only on MetaQuest. Rated Teen for Teen.
Hello and welcome to a very festive and a very merry 1865 Nottingham Forest podcast and our match report following the Reds' home win over Tottenham. And it was a beautiful way to celebrate Christmas. And coming up, we'll have a bit of thought about the match and a bit of thought about Forest being in the top three. Yes, the top three, just as we're coming up to the halfway point in the season. But first, what we'll do is we will bring you the team news, and Forest only made the one change from the win against Brentford. So Matt Sells was in goal, Ola Aina at right back and Nico Williams at left back, and Milenkovic and Murillo, as usual, were at centre half. That meant Morato dropping out and skipper Ryan Yates coming back in the midfield, where he's partnered with Elliot Anderson. And we had the first choice attacking foursome of Elanga and Hudson-Odoi on the wings and Gibbs-White supporting Chris Wood. And our man at the match at the City Ground was Baz. So Baz, it was on the telly I was watching and it was very evocative. There was heavy fog rolling in off the Trent. The floodlights were in force. The fans were in good voice. And it was... I mean, if we'd been the away team, you'd call it a classic smash and grab. But actually, Forest are so much more than that, aren't they?
It was just a fantastic performance all round. Like, everyone did their jobs, knew what they were doing. It would have been nice to get more goals, create more chances, but we didn't need to. And we just did exactly what you'd expect us to do and did it really, really well.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out that Matt Sells definitely had more saves to make than Fraser Forster. He was definitely the busier keeper. But that doesn't matter the way that Forest are playing at the moment, because Anthony Elanga said it in the post-match interview. We know that Spurs can play football, so let's not worry about that. Let's do our own thing. Defensively, the two M's at centre-half were outstanding once again, weren't they?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, one thing I'd like to say, which I've not really seen mentioned in any of the other reviews and stuff like that and posts about it, was Ola Aina just kept Son Heung-min in his pocket all game.
Yeah.
It was an outstanding performance from him.
And let's start with that then, because Son had one of the early, I don't know, you wouldn't even call it a chance because it was snuffed out, but where he cut inside and then he had the chance to have a shot, but he, under pressure from Milenkovic and Murillo, he barely made contact with a real powder puff shot, which was easy for Sells to gather. One of those on the stats goes down as a shot on target, but really was nothing to worry about. And that's pretty much the only time he got away from Aina in the entire match, wasn't it?
Yeah, and not just that, but like we know that Ola's he's two-footed, so not only was he shadowing him and keeping him completely under control, but when he put the block in or won the ball back, he would do a little skip and then start one of our attacks. It was like that they had no answer to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes him a joy to watch, isn't it? Is the fact
Mm.
that he's got enough skill. It's not just about his defending ability. He's got enough skill to then get that yard away from his man, and then he's got the pace to actually make something happen as a result. Let's also hark back to the Villa match a couple of weeks ago, because obviously there's a real tactical tweak by Nuno in that, whereby he had Aina basically man marking McGinn for most of the match, which is why Dominguez was playing on the wing to kind of provide some
Mm.
cover in the right back area. So Aina can do it all. He can man mark, he can start attacks, he can positional sense is amazing. Once again, people have sat up and noticed that Milenkovic has been one of the signings of the season in the Premier League. But Aina, for nothing last summer, has got to be one of our all-time great Premier League signings, hasn't he?
Absolutely. I think, yeah, it's about time he got a bit of recognition for how good he's been this season. He's been outstanding.
And when we do our polls, so those of you listeners, if you haven't caught up with it yet, do have a listen to our Festive Football Terrorists show, which we released on Christmas Eve. And we always do polls saying who's your player of the season so far. And Milenkovic is dominating that. And poor, because these are binary things, you either vote for one person or another. Poor Aina comes in at like 6% of the vote. But I think we'd all say that he is one of the outstanding players. It's just that maybe because Milenkovic has had that transformative effect on the way that Forest shut things out is maybe what's influencing that.
Yeah, and yeah, what Milenkovic does is probably a bit more visible as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back to the match. So worth pointing out, yeah, Spurs had I would say Spurs were probably the best team in the first 20 minutes or so. They were certainly pressing more, trying to pin Forest back. Kulusevski had two or three, again, times when he could have had an effort on goal. And the most dangerous moments, though, one was a free kick by Son Heung-min, which on the telly looked like it had gone in, and even the commentators said that. From where you were sat, could you tell it had gone the wrong side of the post?
Yeah, it looked close, but we could see it was the wrong side of the post, and it was kind of weird. It was like that he's good at these things, but I didn't feel nervous about it. It
Mm.
was it was like, yeah, you can kind of see why Spurs are so Spursy. It's
Well, and speaking of Spurs being Spursy, before we go any further, worth pointing out there were two ex-Forest players who are absolute architects in our promotion from the Championship. So Brennan Johnson on the right wing and Djed Spence starting off at right back, later moving to left back. More about that later. Um, Brennan was the one who was most likely, and he drew two really good saves from cells, didn't he?
he did, and it's a bit weird because I thought Jedward had a really good game, but Brennan didn't.
Hmm.
But yeah, Brennan was getting into the positions and he forced especially the like leaping one was really a
Yeah.
really good save.
Yeah, so one was a classic Brennan shot, from the right hand side across, kind of across the face of goal, go for the far stick. Sells knew what he was doing with that, and pushed it away. Yeah, that second one, the ball kind of came to Brennan. He had just a second to kind of set himself, shot high, and therefore with the pace of it, I mean, when it left his foot, I thought that was in. I have to say.
Mm.
So fair play to Sells for saving that. Really good save. Interestingly,
Interesting as well that he got a few boos because there was a point where Nico clattered him and it was not far in front of me, and I thought, yeah, that's a foul by Nico, but he got a lot of boos for going down and basically clutching his leg where he'd been hit.
well, funny you should say that because the point I was about to make, I was going to ask, what was the reception like for the two ex-Reds?
Um, Brennan, he got these boos, but beyond that, there wasn't very much in it. Um, Jed was getting used to play for a big club a lot, but actually, out of the two of them, I think Jed actually he was one of the players that stood out to me on the Spurs side as actually doing his job properly.
I would say the same, and I have to say that for Forest fans, it's been a bit. Um, we've not enjoyed seeing someone who was so instrumental in our success basically be sit on the sidelines and not have an impact, because I think we know he's Premier League standard, and he's shown that in his last couple of games for Spurs. And yet we hark back to the whole Neil Warnock thing, don't we? He can either be Premier League or non-league. He needs to be managed correctly. And what's good is having waited for so long, now that he's getting his chance under Ange, he is really showing that he wants to make a success of it, I think. And we'll come back to his dismissal a little bit later on. But before we do that, I'm just going to also mention I was sat watching the match with 1865 Dad, who said, "Oh God, Brennan Johnson's annoying, isn't he? The way he keeps moaning and going down really easily and clutching his leg." And I said, "But Dad, you didn't mind that when he was wearing a red shirt." And he goes, "I never noticed it when he was wearing a red shirt." But it's true, he's still the same player, isn't he?
Yeah. And as I say, I think what we noticed when he was wearing a red shirt was that other players, because they couldn't catch him, would clatter him, and that's exactly what Nico did.
Yeah. And of course, ex-teammates. So I did say to my wife at one point, it must be interesting when you are players, like Nico and Brennan, where they formed the right-hand side for Forest for much of that first season back. And it's like, well, they must be mates. And yet here they are. Nico showing absolutely no mercy. So let's talk about the pivotal moment for Forest, the goal that we scored. Do you want to talk us through it as you saw it?
Yeah, so I've read that it was Spence who had the ball, and it was definitely Nico that took the ball off him. And what followed is probably the most perfect classical Nottingham Forest goal through history that you'll ever see. So Nico wins the ball back deep in, just in front of the D, I think it was. He plays the ball to Morgs. Morgs just, and actually I'll come back to Morgan afterwards, actually. But yeah, Morg runs 30 yards into space. His head up all the time, I think. Elanga's obviously playing off the shoulder of, I think it was
Udogie.
Udogie. Yeah. But Morgs puts one through, one of his perfectly weighted through balls. Elanga doesn't even have to break his stride to receive it, and then he just knocks it, I think, with the outside of his foot towards the far post. And yeah, there's a chance that maybe you could say Forster maybe should have done better, but I think it was one of those things where Forest did everything right, and I was just thinking, as I say, it's like a perfect. One of the reasons I think we're doing so well is because as a club, we are a counter-attacking club. We always have been. And it just brought to mind like Stanley Victor picking up the ball in his own half and beating 4 players, or Steve Stone running up the wing and carrying the ball, or Darren Huckabee, again, picking the ball up from deep and running with it.
You talk about it
making a chance out of nowhere.
You talk about it being a classical Nottingham Forest goal. If many of our listeners may have picked up their I Believe in Miracles DVDs and been watching the goals that Forest scored to Brian Howard Clough in the European days, when we were winning the league, those were the goals we scored back then. It was a case of quick break, go up the wings, through ball, and then someone finishing it off. And because the play happened the other side of the pitch from where you sit, what I can say from watching on TV is that you could see Elanga as he was running off the shoulder of Udogie. He did that thing where he just did one slow pace, stuck his arm out, showed Morgan Gibbs-White exactly where he wanted the ball, and then accelerated. And in that moment, because he just dropped off for 1 second, Udogie hesitated, which is why. And Udogie's no slouch. And that's how Elanga was able to get past him. And actually, I will also say that the finish, because of the weight of the ball, Elanga was able to open up his body, and that's why Forster had no chance. He opened up his body and just poked it using his left foot. The pace was exactly right on the ball because of the weight of the pass. And therefore, that's how it went in. The other thing that you'd have noticed watching on TV, and you probably wouldn't have done in all the chaos of celebrating, is that Elanga ended up falling over. So as he righted himself, he realised he was about to celebrate and realised he was right in front of the Tottenham fans. So he just stood there and stared. And then he realised that Morgan had run past him and then beckoned him towards in front of the Forest fans. So there's a brilliant shot. I'm sure someone's taken stills of it on the social media. Where you can just see there's a whole bunch of Spurs fans some of whom are about to really blow up at him, and some of whom are just glaring because they're just like, don't make eye contact with him, don't make eye contact with him. So yeah, a glorious goal, really good goal, exactly the kind of goal that we like to score. And I've got to be honest, although I'm not going to say there wasn't any anxiety, because there absolutely was, because there's only one goal in it. But that is a sign of how Forest take control of matches these days, isn't it?
Well, and the other thing, the other reason for not having that anxiety was, as I was said, like Morgan had the room to this 30 yards to run into. And it was quite telling that this game, he saw more of the ball than he probably has this entire season. He's been double marked out of games, yet Spurs decided to let him have that freedom of the park. So even if they did score, I was sure we would be able to score again. And actually, the fact that they were trying to score meant I was sure that space would open up for us to get more goals out of them.
So in that sense, do you think it felt a little bit like playing Man United?
Yeah. Like remember that time when Yates ran like 50 yards through the middle against Man United? It's like, yeah, they ploughed everyone so far forward, and it worked in that we did struggle to move the ball when we had it because they had so many players like right up on our D, but it meant that as soon as we got past them, it was wide open.
And when you consider they're playing Pat Matassar and Rodrigo Bentancur in midfield, who you'd think are they're kind of more six-ish than eight-ish, aren't they? And yet still there's all that space for our players to run into. Anyway, we'll talk more about tactics and a few other events in a few minutes. At half-time, it was 1-0 to Forest. Hi, it's Rich here, and thanks, as always, for listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast. You may have heard that Billy Davies is going to be doing a gig. Yes, he is coming to the Albert Hall in Nottingham in February to talk about his time at Nottingham Forest, and he will be joined by a few familiar faces such as Wes Morgan, Lee Camp and Terry the Kitman. Well, I just want to let you know that we are soon going to have an exclusive giveaway and more details relating to this event. So keep tuned in to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
When it's PCS time, you know the drill. Pack, research the new base, get the kids in school, because family supports family. At American Public University, we support military families with flexible, affordable online education that moves with you. As a military spouse, your tuition rate is the same as your partner's, just $250 per credit hour. American Public University, education that moves with you. Learn more at apu.apus.edu/military.
You're listening to 1865, the Nottingham Forest podcast.
Welcome back to the 1865 match report, reporting on Forest's 1-0 victory over Tottenham. And Baz, I have to say, one of the things that made me a little bit anxious in the first half was Ryan Yates being on a fairly cheap yellow card. He kind of ploughed through the back of his man in the first half and picked up a yellow. And my wife and I were making little wagers with each other about what time do you think Morato's going to come on, and is it going to be for Yates?
Actually, and it was not just Yates, because Anderson was on the yellow as well for a pretty cheap.
Yeah, and actually Anderson's annoyed me because it was from him giving the ball away in the first place. He made a really rubbish clearance, and it went straight back to Spurs, who pulled down to the end, and that's when he got the yellow card, and it was that free kick that Son took, wasn't it? And that was really cheap. But it does mean as well that Yates is going to be suspended for the Everton match, which is firstly a big loss. Luckily, Nico Dominguez will be available again, and that's timely. But also, it does mean that there's a threat to the record of Forest for, was it 70, 80 years of always
1943, I think I read.
Yeah. So 80 odd years of always having a Forest sort of youth player / academy graduates in the squad. So I wonder with 9 subs available, whether Nuno might be tempted to bring Joe Gardner or Zach Abbott into
Well,
the
I did.
squad for
The
that.
bloke next to me hadn't heard of the record, and I was like, "Oh, he's going to have to put Zach Abbott on the bench now." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I was like explaining it. He goes, "That's amazing! I didn't know about that." But yeah, I think it's worth doing.
Yeah, definitely.
And actually, and yeah, both the little I've seen of Joe Gardner and what I've seen of Zach Abbott, it's not like they're not worthy of like getting 5 minutes in a game anyway.
Yeah, I think it will really depend upon basically upon which Everton we play as well. So
Mm,
I can see it being a case of like where Gardner could come on in stoppage time as a in a kind of a number 10 or one of the attacking positions, especially if we've taken the striker off and gone 5 at the
mm.
back, then he is basically playing as a false 9 for the B team. So that's the kind of thing it can't hurt to do if we're 1 or 2 nil up. But it does depend upon what Everton we're playing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. There was a really intriguing and slightly chaotic attacking moment 5 minutes into the second half, wasn't there? So it was a move down the from right to left. The ball came in from the left hand side and went through. Fraser Forster tried to claim it. He dropped it. Morgan Gibbs-White tried to hit it on the volley. It bounced off the defender. It looked like it was going out. Elanga appeared out of nowhere, put it back across the face of goal. Wood tried to keep it in. It was all a bit much, wasn't it? And I mean, that felt very Spursy, to be honest.
Well, the worst bit about it was I didn't see it because when Forster tried to claim it, like where I sit sort of near the halfway line, so everyone was stood up expecting something exciting to happen. Obviously, Forster tried to claim it, and then everyone like sort of leapt in the air. And so I couldn't see anything. All I could hear was this "whoa!" like so I had no idea what had happened, and then suddenly the ball was out, and then Spurs had a break. So I
Mm.
knew something had happened, but obviously it wasn't enough for us.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. And then the next thing of note that I would point to is when Spurs made that. So we talked about Papsar and Bentancur. Bentancur had a little bit of a Barney with Morgan in the first half, but nothing really
Yeah.
noticeable. Is handbags really. But they were taken off, and James Maddison and Lucas Berval were brought on. And I have to say, considering that Maddison, massive price tag, massive reputation, and Burval, yes, okay, he cost a fair bit, but he's a young lad. He looked far more impressive than the more established man, didn't he?
Yeah, I think Madsen. I can remember I was speaking to a Spurs fan and when they signed him, and he was quite excited, and I was like, I think he's a flake. He's not as good as he makes out he is, and I think that's kind of proved it. Is like the constant Leicester reject chance and the whatever weight of expectation on him to make a difference. You could see it. It must have played on him
It's not
because
the first time he's got Mardy playing for against Forest, is it?
I know exactly, and yeah, and so the things he was trying, it was like he was trying too hard, and then complaining a lot. And Spence's booking came because Madison was complaining.
Yes. So let's talk about that because, frankly, I thought that Madison was lucky not to get booked for the challenge.
Yeah, and I thought at first actually it was Madison that had been booked.
Yeah, and there's a lot of confusion about it, but then the commentators on Amazon did actually get confirmation from from the listening to the officials feed that it was Spence who got the booking. And I have to say, although Spence had a great game, the booking was I mean, it was the cheapest booking of the match, wasn't it? Because he
Yeah,
basically was on the touchline, about to take the throw in, and basically had a Mard and threw the ball down like a school child,
yeah.
basically. And he
Well,
got a
I'll
booking for
just
him right
add to
inside.
that though. I knew that Madison hadn't been booked because he got booked about 2 minutes later for dissent. So
Well, yes. So Madison, yes, he was not having like you say, he was being Mardy basically,
yeah,
and he also. Let's just have a moment to appreciate once again. Search social media for the words Ryan Yates after any Forest match, and you will get opposition fans. And the Spurs fans were going crazy about. And the only foul that Yatesy conceded in the entire match was the one that he rightly got booked for. Maddison, I believe, conceded 4 times as many fouls. And okay, Spurs were chasing the match, so you can maybe, but Yates, I thought, had another very Ryan Yatesy match. And bearing in mind what I said in the first half, I was anxious because he had that booking, and I thought this is the kind of match where he could easily end up getting himself a second booking. In the second half, there's no chance of that.
No.
He looked utterly in control of what he was doing.
And when we were discussing like what subs would happen, both me and the bloke next to me, we were sure it was going to be Anderson going off.
Yeah.
And you might think like actually after Ryan Yates being Ryan Yates, it might be safer to take him off. But no, actually, we knew it was going to be Anderson that would go off because Yates was that assured and controlled in the second half.
Yeah. So just to hark back to the little thing that the game that my wife and I were playing, Morato did come on, but it was for Elanga, which saw Forest go 5-4-1 and Gibbs White pull out to the right hand side. The second subs were Jota and Ward-Prowse, the lesser spotted James Ward-Prowse, coming on for Anderson and for Morgan. So straight swaps there. So Jota on the right, Ward-Prowse replacing Anderson in the middle. And then towards the end, with a few minutes of normal time to go, Ramon Sosa as a straight swap for Callum Hudson-Odoi on the left, and Taiwo for Chris Wood up the middle. And when Taiwo came on, I have to say, there was a moment just after he came on, and listeners, Baz is smiling here because we're both thinking of the same moment. And my wife and I said, and I'm sure that if you and I had been together, we'd have been saying the same. Wouldn't it be amazing if Taiwo scored one of his classic, I'm just going to bundle through and be big and strong and a little bit clumsy. And he almost very, very nearly scored a goal as a result.
About 5 minutes before he came on, I said, you know what, I'd put Taiwo on now because he'll just barge his way through. And yeah, as you say, that's exactly what he did. He just hit the side netting at the end of it.
Yeah. Now, if you're going to be super critical, then you would say maybe he could have squared it because it was an acute angle and Forster kind of had the near post covered. But given that I think Forest are pretty much in control, and given that Taiwo needs a goal, I don't blame him for going for it. So yeah, but yeah, a nice moment. Also, Jota was very Jota-y, wasn't he? And he did he get a yellow card? I certainly think he
did. Yeah. No. So actually, this is important. This one. So Jota, he had the ball. Can't remember who it was, but he had the ball sort of in the sort of right back area, and then he played a stupid pass, so gave it away. And then he then, to make up for it, went in a bit hard. And I think it was Spence who received the ball, went in a bit hard on Spence. And that's partly why Spence was then wound up to get his second yellow.
Yeah. So actually, it was a bit of a mirror image of Anderson's booking in the first half, wasn't it? It's like you're in the fullback position, you try and clear it, you give it away, and then you barge in to try and account for your error. Now, what I will say is, yes, it was very shortly afterwards that Spence got his red card. So let's just talk about that because it was Forest defending imperiously as usual. And it was Jota who was trying to get away and make a break for it. And Spence, well, the way I see it is that Spence took one for the team. I think it was Kulusevski maybe had, the ball had escaped him, which meant that Jota was about to run away. Spence was in that position whereby I either foul him or this man's going to get through and we're definitely going to lose it. So regardless of whether you're already on a yellow or not, you probably take it as a defender.
Yep. And
I would say, as you said earlier on, that Djed was actually possibly their best player on the day. So it finished 1-0 to Forest. Jubilant celebrations. What was the mood like in the ground?
It was like, for the entire sort of second half of the second half, it was like the old sort of Steve Cooper days where the fans were singing to bring the team over the line. And so, yeah, at the end of it, it was like a full on, as good as anything that we've seen in the last few years.
Mm-hmm. And for the record as well, Nuno did say after the match about how he was very, as usual, he said, we're not worried about the table. It's nice to be where we are, but we've not won anything yet. But he did say it was a good performance. It sounds as though Forest did exactly what Nuno set them out to do, about how to realise that Spurs can have the ball, we can counter them. Spurs score a lot of goals, so we need to defend well. And Nuno, the way we started was nice and brave. In the second half, we started better. In the final moments, it was about defending and belief. The commitment of the players to avoid danger was good. And that's worth mentioning because, as we said, in the second half, Spurs didn't really have many. There weren't really many moments of pure jeopardy. There's anxiety because they were attacking us. But Sells didn't have huge amounts to do.
No, I think also what the Spurs had a lot of what maybe wouldn't go down in the stats as shots off target, but that's because every time they tried to move the ball through the sort of penalty area towards the penalty area, there was a red shirt in the way, just putting the body on the line to block it. It was like it was almost like watching like bowling or something, just like all these pins kept on getting in the way.
And speaking of which, Nuno did say the centre of defence is huge for us. It is really special. And we've said this before, but imagine that you are playing in the Premier League against Forest, especially at the City Ground, but even away from home. And you see that you're struggling to get past Milenkovic and Murillo, and then Morato comes on, and you're just going, "Oh no, how are we going to do this?" And Morato, once again, he just comes on. It's so seamless, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually, the other thing about it was after the final whistle, even though Morato had only been on for 20 minutes or whatever, he was there with both arms up in the air, milking it from the crowd. Like he knew that he played his part in that. And this is what Nuno keeps saying about it doesn't matter if you're a starter or if you're a finisher. Morato knew how important he was to that victory, and he was all up for it.
Yes, in fact, in a sort of slightly more demure way, I would say the same about Ramon Sosa as well. So. Yeah. And speaking of central defenders, bit of debate in our household, in our living room, about Milenkovic or Murillo. So who was your player of the match for Forest?
Well, I'd given it to Aina anyway, but out of those two, Murillo catches the eye more, obviously, and because it was Spurs, he got the chance to like do little marauding runs and pick out the passes. But I also think, especially in the first half, he made a few mistakes. But obviously he had Milenkovic behind him, and Milenkovic did one of those unshowy, just put the foot in at the right time.
Worth pointing out as well, Murillo rightly got booked for a late challenge on Berval. And just like Yatesy, though, after that, didn't put foot wrong. Looked absolutely imperious. It's almost like he needed the yellow card to really kind of get his head in gear for that. So, another great victory for Forest. We are, at the time of recording, third in the table. That might change depending upon, well, let's be honest, we expect Arsenal to beat Ipswich later on today. But if Arsenal don't manage to get a draw or a win, then Forest would be in third position, and you'd never have imagined that. So let's take a bit of time to enjoy that, enjoy us being in the European spots. And it is Everton next, coming up on Sunday, I think it is. Lost track of the days, to be honest, but it's on the 29th. And we will, of course, have people at the match and reporting back afterwards. So please stick with us. Thank you very much to you, Baz, and thank you, listener, for joining us. All of our links are at 1865.football. Come on, you Reds. But at 1-0, it was hot. At half-time, it was 1-0 to Forest.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.